When was the last time you looked at your ERP through your customer's eyes? Not the dashboards, not the workflows, the documents. Because every invoice, every label, every delivery note, that's your real system to the outside world. And when that breaks, your customers don't blame the ERP, they blame you. Today, we're unpacking why this layer is so often ignored and how it becomes a critical point of failure or a competitive advantage. I'm your host, George Collier. I'm joined by Dene Palmer from the ERP Mechanics. Let's get into it. Good morning, Dean. Welcome to the ERP Perspective.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me, mate.
Let's start with a little bit about Dene Palmer, your background and what's brought you to present day.
Yeah, cool. Well, very, very quickly, I spent 13 years in output management, document management for all kinds of systems. Started out in the financial world, working with core banking platforms and loan origination systems, stuff like that. But 7, 8 years ago, I moved over into the ERP world, arguably more documents than banking and finance, right? So now I spend my life doing things like labels, invoices, packing lists, whatever. And it's really about automating and streamlining those document heavy processes, right? So my background is pretty technical, but over the more recent years, I've moved more into kind of project management, stakeholder management type role, helping businesses all over the world solve their document challenges. That's me.
Fantastic. And how long now have you been with ERP Mechanics for?
Yeah, so just over a year. And that's an exciting phase of my career, right? So I spent a couple of years in product and stakeholder management, like I said before, and some people call me crazy for this. I missed working with end users. I missed working on projects and solving real problems and getting deep into the weeds because at my heart, I'm a technical, logical problem solver, right? That's what gets me going. So I moved back onto the partner side of things. And that's where I am now, heading up our push at ERP Mechanics into document automation and document printing. ERP Mechanics is traditionally an FO-based consultancy. And so we do a lot of work for Dynamics customers, lots of projects, again, all over the world, all different industries. But I'm now here to kind of spearhead the document automation push and support our ERP customer base with those complex document challenges.
Fantastic. And I know you mentioned what you like. Most people call you crazy.
Yeah.
Getting back into that, but what is it about that you enjoy so much?
It's the problem solving. It's helping people, and I get it all the time. And I'm really glad to be back into that space, right? Where a prospect comes along, hey, we've got this problem we've been trying to solve for 2 years and we've had no luck. And then we solve it within a couple of months. I love getting deep into the weeds, dealing with those business processes, the logic, the data transformation, making systems talk to each other that don't necessarily talk to each other out of the box. That's just it. And there's something really nice about finishing an engagement, walking away from a project where you feel like you've really helped a business or really helped a team do something.
Is it global or is it currently just in the UK?
Yeah, global. I'm in the UK, personally based in the UK, but the ERP Mechanics business is global. We've got people in the US, we've got someone in Ghana, Lithuania, all over the shop. So we are working with customers all the way from Australia through the UK, South Africa, US, Baltics. We have no kind of borders.
Why do you think the title ERP isn't what your customers see and what your documents are? Why did you think that was such a good title, a good subject to discuss?
Yeah, it's something that I see a lot, right? You walk into an ERP project and generally it starts off pretty simple for us. Hey, we just need to print invoices. We just need to print dispatch notes, whatever. But the thing that I have learned and the thing I try and talk about now is that most ERP teams live inside the system, right? Most companies using an ERP, the team internally using the ERP, they understand the ERP system. They understand the business process and the workflow. But your customers don't. Customers never see the tables. They don't see the workflows. They don't see the integrations, right? All they see is the invoice or the email or the packing slip or the label on the box or whatever it might be. That's their entire experience of your ERP and your business process, right? So that's what I always try and explain to companies that we engage with. One thing is making the documents functionally work for the business process internally. You have to have a dispatch note, you have to have a packing list, right? You have to have an invoice. But another thing is making them a consistent touch point for your brand and your message and your value prop and all those things. Every document that you send out to a customer, whether that's B2B or B2C, right? It could be a business customer, it could be a third-party supplier, it could be whatever. Every document you send out is a chance to reinforce your brand and your positioning.
When you break it down, it seems obvious, but why do you think ERP teams often underestimate the importance of the document output, even though it's the primary way, as you mentioned, customers and operations experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable, right? Because the people like the end users and the people working on the ERP project, they are primarily concerned with the business process, making the business function. Order comes in, production unit is done, the production run's complete, order goes out. Internally, everybody's happy, right? I think it's that thing like what and your world that you live in. So they're seeing the business process as a very functional thing. A, B, C, D happens, everyone's happy, tick the box, process finished. They're not thinking about the customer engagement, right? And I don't think this is a failing on ERP teams, right? And I want to be really clear about that. It's a business ownership thing, right? So it should be, the marketing team, the branding team, they should be getting involved. How do we want to present ourselves to our clients? Yes, the functional stuff happens, and you ERP users are great at doing that. But here's our little flavor on the top that we want to make sure that we're consistent and we are sending this thing. And I've worked on projects before, right, where the marketing, the branding team, the customer communication team, sometimes there is people responsible primarily for that, and messaging. I've worked on some projects where everybody's involved, everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, and it is amazing. And we've done stuff like, you bring in promotional materials, you send an invoice, but you're bringing in like a seasonal promotion thing on the bottom, which can drive further revenue. There's all kinds of trigger points, and using the data in the system. Hey, we noticed you bought 10 of these over the last quarter. Maybe you're interested in this thing too. So we can do all kinds of like intelligent mapping and logic-based data drawing to pull in relevant stuff. So I don't think it's a failing of the ERP team or the ERP system, right? It's I've always seen documents and document outputs. The business has to take a real holistic view of that.
I think they potentially obviously underestimate it because it's not solely, then like you said, it's a bigger thing. The personalization of you're tracking obviously what someone's buying and customizing those invoices or customizing that them documents, it could be a massive competitive advantage, which I know we'll get into deeper into the podcast.
Absolutely.
But I mean, there's pros and cons. I mean, if you're missing that, it can be a massive disadvantage as well. I mean, at what point does document output become a serious operational challenge? And what are the common breaking points you see in sort of larger ERP environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two things here, right? There's what we've just touched on, and we'll come back to later, is the branding and the opportunity for reinforcing your brand, increasing revenue, all that stuff. But then there's the operational side, right? So when document output and output management becomes a serious problem, generally happens at scale. So when you hit a certain volume or a number of variations, and by variations, I mean, you might be managing things across multiple brands or multiple business entities, multiple legal entities, whatever. So yes, you might need to send out an invoice, but the invoice needs to be slightly different based on the legal entity it's being sent from, or maybe even the client it's being sent to, right? We're working with a few customers at the minute who are manufacturers, and they deliver product to all kinds of retailers, but including kind of big box retailers, right? The big high street presence that you will know. Those retailers will not accept any old invoice format. They have a set invoice format that all of their suppliers have to adhere to. So the big retailer, their processes can all be automated, right? So we work with a lot of manufacturers now where they have a standard invoice format that they send to their standard customers, but the high volume, big box presence stores, we have to do this custom invoice format, right? And that's a good problem to have because it means the manufacturer is doing well and their product is being noticed and being stocked by big retailers. But managing that second invoice format is a challenge, and that's where we come in, because we can take the same data from the ERP system. We don't have to build a second query or anything. We just have a variance on the templating our side with some kind of logical flag to say if customer name equals ABC, we do invoice version 2. And we manage that all on our side of the fence. So it's stuff like that, suddenly and again, I get into a project. Yeah, we need to send an invoice. Cool, great. How many entities have you got? How many regions? How many tax authorities do you deal with? Okay, suddenly that one document is 12 documents, right?
Yeah.
Or 12 templates. Labels as well. We do an awful lot of work with labels, if I'm honest. And a lot of the time you're doing, picking labels, packing labels, whatever. Box labels is one thing. Product labels, they often get the retailer's logo put on it, so the retailer doesn't have to do things on their end. So the label has to be slightly different depending on who you're shipping it to, or it might need a different measurement unit depending on the country you're shipping it to, things like that. So that's when it really becomes a problem that companies should be taking seriously.
The common breaking points that you mentioned there, it sounds like obviously volume is a massive one. When customers doing well and they're making lots of sales, that could be a breaking point. But you also mentioned the diversity of products as well. So
Yeah.
if a customer's dealing with you in several countries, but also if you've got a large variety of products, you're going to potentially need different types of invoices and a lot of different details per documentation as well.
Absolutely. The number of variations is a key thing that we often get drawn into. Volume is one thing, and that's, if I'm honest with the tool set that we use, it's relatively easy to solve, because you can chuck more power at it and it will be fine. The variations is the big challenge. Because you really have to understand your output landscape, so to speak. What do we need to send? Where do we need to send it to? When does it need to change? What is that kind of logical workflow? If this, else that, all of these branching points, and we can have one data file come in from the ERP system. And depending on what's in that data file, what customer it is, what country it's coming from, what currency it's in, all of these things, we can produce 20 plus different versions of that invoice or that document. So yeah, it can get quite complex quite quickly.
Is there one customer recently or one scenario which you've really managed to help with their system, with their ERP system, would it be volume or maybe it be the diversity of products? Has there been a recent event that you had to really get stuck in?
Yeah, so there's three that jump to mind actually recently. One is the big box store scenario. So we do have a manufacturer who's done very well for themselves, and they are now being stocked by 2 big box stores in the US. So we had to maintain and develop these custom invoice formats for them, which was a cool project to do because it means they're doing well, and then we get to continue supporting them. Another one is labels, and I'm going to talk about labels a lot. So working with a global of wool and yarn and stuff like that, spooled cotton products. Labels had been a problem for them for a year or more. 12, 18 months, looking at out-of-the-box solutions for their ERP system. Nothing could quite meet what they needed to do. We came in and we solved it in 3 weeks. And they even had some processes that, because of the limitations of the ERP, they were, for certain product labels in certain regions, they were manually filling in an Excel template that they'd created and dropping that into the label printing workflow, right? Because of the variations. We managed to build a query, because we can do custom queries too. I kind of said earlier, we don't need to build queries for a lot of these things. Sometimes we do, right? But we went and built a custom query that pulled in all the variation information into one data payload. And then we do all of the intelligent switching on our side. So instead of them now having to manually fill in an Excel file and drop that into some folder somewhere and cross your fingers that everything works, we're now pulling that data straight from the source ERP and doing all the variations on our side. So the warehouse and the shop floor is now just running like clockwork. Third one, and I didn't touch on this actually, but it is an interesting one. We see a lot of things now where we are having to gather data from external systems. The initial trigger for the document generation might come from the ERP, but then we have to go and gather information from a third-party system somewhere, whether that's compliance, whether that's logistics, maybe. So I've worked with a couple of logistics companies, one shipping company, and you've got manifests, right, of what's on the truck or what's on the ship. And that comes from the ERP. So product ABC is in container XYZ, and we're going to load it onto ship or lorry C, right? But what you don't get from the ERP is the release slot for that ship in the dock. So we have to go and we're taking this information from the ERP, producing the release document for the vehicle of what's on it, blah, blah, blah. But we're also going out through an API to the dock system. What's the release slot? What's the reference number? What's the time? Blah, blah, blah. And then we produce that onto one document, right? And if that document is not correct, the ship can't leave port.
Yeah.
And I remember walking into a road logistics company, a haulage company, and if these systems were not there and the documents were not produced on time, none of the lorries could leave the depot. So it's really important.
Yeah, that could have massive financial impacts.
Absolutely. So that's three big examples of real breaking points that we've managed to solve recently.
I mean, they're all so different as well, which is interesting. One thing that stood out to me is, it doesn't matter the size of your organization. Sometimes businesses have old processes they try and maintain, growth, and then they go, oh, it'll be fine. And then when you get that influx of obviously customers, or you have to issue more invoices, either that process is going to break, or it's just not going to be suitable for the business anymore. So yeah, I think that you can really help businesses get through that difficult sort of growth period we're in.
I want to pick up on you highlighted that those three examples were all very different, and they are.
Yeah.
But from my side, they're not. The business process is different. For me, it's still just a data problem. Where do we pull the data from? What do we need to do to it? Where do we need to send it? And I get on these calls all the time. A customer or a prospect is going, oh, we've got this thing and we can't solve it. And it's really difficult. I kind of look past the business process, right? I'm like, the business process is your job, that you understand what you need to do, right? You tell me what data needs to go where and how it needs to get there. That's all I care about. So I tend to break it down that way. And then it's not actually that different. Yes, the business process might be different. Yes, it might be a shipping document versus a label, but it's still data transformation and integration for me, So that's quite a reassuring thing when I put it that way to a prospect. It's like we haven't solved this exact problem before, but we've done something very similar. And, we're just tweaking a few knobs here and there to suit your business. But at its core, it's still just a data problem.
The problem is quite different, but the cure or the solution is normally quite similar. Might reassure a few people that are having difficulties with the ERP system at the moment. But where do ERP systems, particularly obviously your Dynamics, your SAP, your Infor, typically fall short when it comes to documentation generation and that output management?
Yeah, so I kind of see ERP systems of whatever flavor. They're data engines, right? They're business process engines. They're not output engines. They all have standard inbuilt tools that will handle your kind of day-to-day things, but they don't handle high volume, high variation output, right? And that's why there is tools on the market that help you with that. So then you kind of treat your output as a single unified layer. And there's some clients that I work with as well who might have multiple ERP systems, right? Or multiple business systems, for want of a better term. They might have an ERP, they might have a finance system, they might have a marketing system, whatever. We can sit in front of all of them to ensure that you're having consistent branding and consistent formatting across all these systems. So if, I don't know, a customer address is updated in one system but not another one, we can catch that. Rather than depending on the inbuilt output from the three separate systems. Yes, it's that type of stuff where you are dealing with high volume, high variation, lots of complexity, gathering information from other systems. Like I said, it doesn't have those third-party integrations where you can go and pull stuff from somewhere. So that's where I see them falling short.
I know we've already touched briefly on this, but what are the real business consequences when document output isn't designed properly, but especially for manufacturing, logistics, and retail environments?
Yeah, fine. So lots. In manufacturing, right? If the labels are wrong or the labels don't come out, the product can't be packed. It can't leave, can't be sold. Whatever you've got, that shipment is just stuck there. If production papers aren't produced, nobody can do their jobs. Nobody can go and make stuff. Logistics, I kind of mentioned it earlier. The trucks can't leave the depot. The ship can't leave the port. They're real barriers to income, right? If you can't get your goods to where they need to go, nobody's going to buy them. And we also do a couple of things with retail customers, and we are starting to engage with retail customers more and more, actually. Very interestingly, if you send a bad invoice, or an invoice that looks poor or is maybe confusing, that can lead to a customer query, which can lead to delayed payments and delayed cash flow. There's a lot of impact there. It's not all about stuff getting out on time. It is if the stuff going out is fit for purpose.
And on the retail side, obviously, you've seen a massive influx of retail customers at the moment that you're assisting. Would you say that's sort of the main type of industry that you are assisting with this documentation and invoice systems, or is it quite evenly split across manufacturing, logistics, and retail?
We are manufacturing heavy. I would
Okay.
say that's always been the core, and manufacturing tends to have a lot of documents, lots of labels, lots of, if you think about a manufacturing company, there is a whole process there, right? That's all paper-based, all document-based. We need stock coming in, and that needs to be tracked and logged. We need to make something which might need a production order or some kind of instruction or a technical drawing, all kinds of things. But then to get that product out of the warehouse, you need a picking list and a packing list and a product label and a box label and a dispatch note, and they all need to be printed, right? So we have been manufacturing heavy for a long time, but we are starting to see more retail. And by retail, I mean, B2C. Those kind of companies are starting to take notice of these customer communication challenges. And there's two terms you'll hear me say, right? There is output management and there's customer communication. And they're broadly the same thing, but I tend to use output management when I'm talking about a B2B scenario and customer communication when it's B2C, because the stakeholders and the driving factors behind decisions are slightly different.
You're advising these organizations, how should they rethink automation to include document generation and distribution as a core part of their ERP strategy?
Yeah, I would advise them to see it as a core part of their business strategy, regardless of what systems they're using. Consistent branding, consistent messages, automating these things so that they just happen. And that sounds magical, right? But it is possible. When things like when the production order is finished, the product label just prints. It doesn't have to be somebody manually pressing a button. There's all kinds of stuff that we can do there. But I would definitely recommend people to organizations to think about it as a core part of their business strategy.
So, I mean, have you had a business recently that's really had that, maybe not eureka moment, but they've gone, right, okay, how can we rethink this automation process? And you've seen them do that in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one client right now who we have worked with for a long time, 7 or 8 years. But over the last couple of years, again, they've done very well for themselves and they have grown through acquisition. So they've acquired 20 plus other companies over the last few years. And straight away, they're on to us. Hey, we want to integrate these people. We don't want to leave them on their own. How can we manage it? And it's a key part of their business is to ensure consistency and scalability of their outputs across all of these regions and all of these companies. So we're doing a project with them now, and we've actually just had phase 2 of that go live, and we've got more coming later this year. We are developing it in such a way where we basically have one master template for each type of document, and then we have this intelligent switching for each entity, each brand, which obviously saves us delivery time. It saves them a bit of money, and it makes things easier to manage and maintain going forward because there's less configuration. But they are very, very keen on doing it that way, so the document outputs are a first-class citizen in their project, and they really pay attention to the workflow and the business logic behind that.
With the implementation, obviously, of automation and helping with that document generation, it sounds like obviously with the business processes, it's kind of a massive part of it's that change management aspect as well, to get everybody on board of adopting this new way of assisting with the documentation. So I think it's a massive part of that journey is getting the business on board, having that change management aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well as I, right, that's a big thing in ERP generally. Change management, user training, getting people to move away from processes that they've used for 10 years and it's always worked. This spreadsheet that's patching around a finance system, or the spreadsheet that was patching around a label printing thing for me, it's always worked. And there's one key member of staff that maintains that process and everybody goes to them for it. So yeah, kind of user management, change management is a really big thing. We tend to get involved in a project for a specific use case generally. And there'll be one part of the business driving that, but then as we kind of get into an organization and we solve that first problem or the first batch of problems, word tends to spread. And then suddenly there's another team coming to us. Hey, we've got this janky process from 10 years ago too. Can we talk about it? Because we've seen what you've done elsewhere. So my approach tends to be quite organic with it. And you just be, genuinely helpful, have those conversations. Yeah, happy to talk about it. Let's just have a quick workshop. No worries. And just, try and be like a trusted advisor. Speak from experience too, right? Those kind of war stories are always reassuring to people. Been there, done it, no stress. But yeah, agree. It's a challenge.
No, 100%. I think the fact that you can really identify with customers and share with them how you've helped businesses, and the stories that you've mentioned today, I think will really identify with a lot of different businesses and a lot of people within the ERP space thinking, we're having that challenge or we're going through something similar to what you've mentioned. What principles should companies follow when designing document output solutions that can obviously scale with the business? Complex, fragile, or difficult to maintain is the main one.
Yeah, absolutely. I will use the client I spoke about recently as the gold example, right? Okay. Plan for the future. Don't plan for today. Change will happen. So your templates will have to evolve. Have that in mind. If you launch a new brand, if you acquire a new company, think about things like try and compartmentalize things, so it's not just an invoice, it's a header and a footer and some line items, right? And you can design the system in such a way that they are separate components, right? So as an example, if you design it in that way, let's say, actually, let's take a step back. You've got 100 templates, 100 different document types, labels, whatever. You need to go and change your business address. You need to go and change your logo, right? You've got 100 places to change that logo now. Good luck. That's going to take a long time. Wow. And you want it to be in exactly the same coordinates on each document so it looks consistent. Have fun with that. If you design it in a compartmentalized way, which is what we do a lot more now with our clients as the technology has evolved, we now have a pre-configured header block. So we change that logo in one place and it's automatically applied to 100 outputs, because these outputs that we build nowadays tend to be a collection of pre-existing assets rather than their own unique thing. So it's kind of like Lego, kind of like building blocks. We bring in the header, we bring in the line items, we bring in the footer, we might bring in some kind of marketing information or a technical drawing if it's a production paper or something, whatever. That makes it far easier to both scale and maintain, because when you need to add a new report or a new template, you've got 2/3 of it done. So you just need to deal with the transactional data or the production data, whatever it might be. And that maintenance is clearly way easier because you change things once and it applies to your whole estate. So it's really about just taking some time to understand this thing properly, rather than saying, hey, I want an invoice. It's actually, we're going to need 50 documents. How can we design the system intelligently to manage that in a cost-effective and a scalable way? So it's that kind of templating framework, I guess, to give it a name.
Yeah, I was going to say, for what I was getting out, that was flexible template. There's essentially a template that you can use, but you can amend as the business grows, goes into different scenarios. At least you've got something that can be replicated quickly, but it can also be tailored to a way that's going to be suitable for that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. We try and avoid as much as possible. Sometimes you have to do it, but as much as we can, we try and avoid one-off customizations, or hard coding things. It's normally a kind of logical flag. So then if you need to change something in the future, you can just add another option to that switcher. We build a system where the data payload comes in, we basically scan through the data payload first and we pull out key information, and that might be the brand, it might be the entity, it might be the country it's going to, it might be a delivery channel preference for the client. Do they prefer to get post or emails, whatever? So we scan through for all that key information first, and then based on that information, we do our stuff, right? So it's very easy for us to add another option at that stage. So we try and kind of front load the filtering or the routing, whatever you want to call it, and then we do the generation afterwards. So I always try and speak to customers, and there's one I'm working with now, actually. They've asked me, what data do you need? I'm like, well, that depends on you, right? What's your scenarios? What do your customers ask for? Do they all get it posted to them? Do they all get it emailed to them? Do some of them need EDI? Do some of them need e-invoicing, right? E-invoicing is a huge thing at the moment across Europe and coming to our fair shores in the UK in a few years' time too. We don't want the customer or the ERP user to have to generate a separate data payload for each of those scenarios, because that's very expensive, right? And it takes a long time to do those ERP customizations. You've got to go and get a partner or a developer. You've got to schedule the deployments, do all the testing. Whereas we can handle that on our side with a single payload, right? So it's those conversations that I think are really, really important. How do you want to send this stuff out? How do you need to send this stuff out? And then we can guide you on how to achieve that.
I mean, it sounds like the longest period of time in this process is at the very start. When you're mapping out what these templates are, when you're mapping out what these would look like, I'm guessing you're saying to this customer, take your time with this, because once it's done, we've got these flexible templates for you, and yes, they can be amended, but if we spend more time now, when you're scaling and you come into these different challenges, hopefully you won't need to change as much.
Yeah, exactly that. Preparation, right, is often the thing that, not just ERP, but a lot of business projects, you don't prepare. Fail to prepare and you prepare to fail.
And do you ever send a customer away and say, maybe spend a bit more time on really thinking about, these documentation output, the different scenarios? And do you ever get some businesses that may be in a hurry to do this, and, it would save them a headache in the future if they really, really focus on the now?
Yeah. So something that I do a lot in my role, kind of leading this expansion and heading up this part of the business, is customer workshops, right? Where we dive into that. So initially the engagement is, hey, we just need an invoice. Cool. Okay. Well, let's talk about it. What else might you need? Do you do this? 13 years of experience. I know the questions to ask, right? Yeah. Do you do these documents? Do you do that documents? This legislation is coming in 3 years' time. Are you going to need to meet it? That type of stuff. So I do often, I wouldn't send them away per se, but I slow the process down, and let's have a couple of workshops. Let's just talk. And then we come out, and we have a process behind that. So we come out with a targeted list of what we need to do. And then we can go away and architect the best solution.
Fantastic. I mean, how can organizations use document output, invoices, delivery notes, labels, all the things that we've discussed as a competitive advantage rather than, a compliance necessity?
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, you said it there. Compliance is the baseline, right? Everybody has to meet it. The order confirmation, the invoice, whatever it might be, that has to go out, right? But the organizations that I'm working with that I think are winning are treating documents as first-class citizens in their IT estate, but also as those brand touch points, right? And I'm going to speak to you now as a consumer of services, right? We all buy from businesses all the time. And we know personally how frustrating it can be to deal with poor communication, miscommunication, confusing communication, whatever. It can taint your brand, and word of mouth is a very powerful thing, right? especially in the world we live in now with social media, and it's easy to gain traction. And we do a lot of, the world that I live in, we do a lot of research into that, and tell the stories. So, last year in 2025, 20% of consumers changed provider because of a poor communication experience. And that number actually rises to just above 25% in the younger demographics at 18 to 40-year-old. So it's really, really interesting for me when I go into a prospect and tell them this, and they're like, okay, cool, maybe we do need to think about this a bit more, But yeah, every communication is an opportunity to reinforce your brand, your value, your messaging, and also just to avoid those annoying slowdowns in your business, right? I mentioned it earlier. Fast, accurate invoices speed up cash flow. If your invoices are clear, concise, easy to pay, your cash flow is improved, right? If they're confusing and it leaves room for a client to ask you a question or to query the invoice, your cash flow is slowed down.
Yeah.
Labels going to the right place at the right time with the right information speeds up the warehouse efficiency.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff really that you can think about. But, there's a lot of retailers, there's a lot of manufacturers, right? Everybody in this world has got competition. You're not the only person out there making product X, right? So when everybody's customer communication looks and feels the same, there's an opportunity there for you to differentiate. And maybe it's a bit of a big example, right? But look at something like Apple. They really care about their brand presence and their messaging and how they position themselves, and their customer communication matches that, So it's a huge part of the customer experience, whether that's B2B or
100%. I think, as you mentioned, I think so right is how competitive the market is. Maybe not for Apple because
Yeah.
everybody wants an iPhone, but in other markets, how many strikes does it take for something to be wrong for a customer to go, oh, I'll try a competitor?
Yeah.
I think that's come down so much now where it only takes a few emails of a mailing list or an invoice being wrong or some delivery notes being wrong for a customer to go, it's that competitive market. Well, why don't I try this new supplier? I mean, you said 25% there, between 18 and 40. I'm surprised it's not even higher because, viewing from myself, maybe I'm a little bit more sensitive to these things. But when you have a bad experience, I think now because there is so many other options, it's so easy for a customer to move away to a new provider.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something that I talk about a lot is the fact that buyers are more informed than they ever have been.
Yeah.
It's a Google search or a ChatGPT search away and you've got a new provider for whatever service it is, so the kind of friction of switching is not where it used to be. So I think it's a really, really interesting point. And, I've spoken a lot about documents today, right? But the thing I am finding myself talk about more and more is data. Is an email a document? That's debatable. I would say it's customer communication, which is where I use that phrase, right? So yes, documents is part of what we do, but really at our core, we're a data-based business. We take data from place A, we do something to it, and we send it to place B, and each of those interactions is a chance to increase your customer experience, reinforce your brand, reinforce your mission, your values, whatever. So yeah, I think as things continue the way they are and personalization and hyper personalization, becomes even more relevant, I think the organizations that take this to heart and treat it as a first-class part of their estate will really benefit from it.
100%. 100%. I mean, if you were advising the ERP leaders watching the episode today, what's the one mistake they're most likely making when it comes to document output, and what's the long-term cost of getting it wrong?
I think the biggest mistake is that a lot of businesses and ERP leaders treat business output as a compliance checklist. They're like, okay, cool, we're sending the invoice, done. Whereas they should be treating it as part of their business strategy, part of the business capability. And the long-term cost is massive, right? Technical debt is one thing, maintaining these processes internally. If you've done the example we used earlier, if you've got 100 templates and you need to change your logo, that's a lot of time if you haven't designed the stack properly. Operational inefficiency, if the labels aren't coming out on time, if you're waiting for a key user to fill in the Excel sheet and drop it in, that's a problem, right? Constant reworking of templates and tweaks as things aren't working because you didn't take the time to spec things out properly up front, and you've got your templates that work for all, 90% of your suppliers or vendors or whatever. But you haven't accounted for this one variation that somebody needs. If you'd have done that up front, you could have designed the system in a better way. And then, it's just, to me, it becomes such a bottleneck. And I see it time and time again. The bottleneck to efficiency is these paper-based things that take a long time to come out.
Yeah.
because printers are not the fastest thing in the world sometimes.
100%. But yeah, I just want to say, Dean, thank you so much for coming on to the ERP perspective, showcasing obviously what ERP mechanics do, and discussing that topic. ERP isn't what your customers see. Your documents are. I think that was a fantastic discussion. Before we wrap up the episode today, is there anything else that you'd like to give to the audience today, or anything else that you'd like to speak about?
I mean, I should say something. So I think, I've been doing this for a long time, right? And I wouldn't still be doing it if I wasn't passionate about it and found it interesting. And I really do believe that the organizations that focus on this properly and get this right will be the organizations that win in the long term. There's an awful lot of opportunity out there. We touched on the, 20, 25% of people switch after a bad experience. Who do they switch to? That's the other side of the coin, right? So yes, you might be the unfortunate company who's had the poor communication and lost that client. Who are they switching to? How can you position yourself as the organization that people switch to when they have a bad experience? That shows why your communication should be top tier.
That's a great lens to look for. And like I said, I'll link Dean's profile below this video on LinkedIn, and more details around ERP Mechanics. I hope it's the first of many on the ERP perspective. And this will be live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, and we're also live now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So no excuse not to connect with the ERP perspective and our fantastic guests like Dean and the ERP Mechanics.